So I have an ErgoDox EZ, which I bought in like 2016. It's a fantastic keyboard, and I'm like really into the mechanical keyboard space, which is kind of the topic of this conversation. We'll dig into a little bit more about like what's different in this space. But when I was reading your background, I noticed that you were like doing web development and a lot of writing, and you sort of transitioned over into having a hardware company. And I was like, what was that transition? Like, how did you get from like writing web code and articles for like tech magazines and stuff, and like getting into, okay, now I'm gonna like build a hardware product to sell? Because that's a very, what I think is like a big transition, a very different industry.
Yeah, um, that's interesting. So yes, so if you look at work-wise, yes, I used to be a writer. I wrote for PC World. I was a writer and editor for Make Use of, um, and I used to do web development. I used to code Rails and React, your garden variety stuff. And I always wanted to have a business. I always felt um, in previous businesses that I worked at, obviously there were always various things that I didn't quite agree with. Like I wouldn't do it like that. Nothing major, right? Like all companies were good, but I always had this thought in the back of my mind. Well, I would do it maybe a little bit differently. Or I have many opinions. Um, and at the same time, I was really passionate about keyboards. I always have been. I don't even know why. I guess it's something, when there's a device that you use for, you know, 40, 50, 60 hours a week sometimes, you kind of, again, get to have opinions and you get to have maybe wishes. I wish this was a little different and whatnot. But what really happened was I got super lucky. That's the real answer. Because I'm obviously not the only guy around who had an idea. Oh, I wish I had my own business. Oh, I wish keyboards work differently. The idea part is easy. Where I got incredibly lucky is with my business partner. And that was the real I didn't know we were going to talk business. I thought it's going to be more technical, but this is more of a business question, so I got to share. That was the breakthrough because usually when you see like a typical crowdfunding or hardware startup story, you got a guy plus idea. Okay, great, I have this thing. Maybe some degree of market validation. Oh, other people want it too. Great. Okay. Now let's make it. And at that point, the stories start actually converging on a fairly common path, which is let's go to Shenzhen, let's fly to China and find a factory. And you get all of these heroic, and I'm not being sarcastic, they really are heroic stories by founders, just going door to door in China, looking for the right factory, trying to get it made, and then there's production issues and they have to fly. We've all seen that. I had none of that. None. Because my partner is my manufacturer. Long before we talked about my background and we said I was a writer and all that, long before then, when before I worked for PC World, I actually worked for this company called Tiebao. And this was before remote jobs were a thing, but they took me on remotely. I'm talking like early 2000s. And they're a Taiwanese high-end manufacturer of industrial equipment. Stuff like, at the time, it was serial to IP converters and things like that, like industrial gear, but very nicely done. I worked for them for several years. I was a technical writer. I did stuff there, and then I moved on. But I moved on, on very good terms. Like we left and we're friends and all that. Then a few years later, I had this keyboard idea, and I said, "Well, I know who should make it. I know like the perfect company to make it." And I reached out to Dmitry Slepov, who is Tiebau's managing director, and he was my boss. It's a small company, and we were friends. I go, "Listen, I got an idea. There's this weird keyboard. It's an existing design. It's the ErgoDox. What do you think? Can we do something?" And he's like, "Yeah, that's kind of interesting." And then we started looking into it, and he bid on an ErgoDox on eBay. This is an ErgoDox, like a hand-built ErgoDox that somebody made out of a kit and would offer it. And he was outbid at $400. And that's when he said, "Okay, there is something here. Like people, I guess, want this. Let's do it." And things moved on from there. And I can talk a lot about the crowdfunding and all that. But the upshot is that he is the perfect partner. He is so amazing. Like being able to have an equal partner, a hardware partner. This is not an OEM relationship. It is a true partnership. Their logo is on our product. Uh, there's on our website, there's a video showing how it's made. It's their offices. So I never had to worry about this kind of, it's almost like a conflict of interest with, not a conflict of interest, but rather different priorities, shall we say, in the traditional OEM relationship, where the OEM just kind of wants to get rid of you. They want to make a bunch of your stuff and move on with life. And, then next batches, whenever, make another big order. And the care is not necessarily there. With Tiebao and with Dima, my partner, I had to do none of that, right? Like he really, really cares as a person. He really cares about the product. And they are an amazing company for making the stuff we do. They have such deep, deep technical expertise and all the nitty gritty, like CE and FCC certification, which is not always straightforward. You make a product, you make the PCB, you make everything, you take it to the lab, and then they zap the heck out of it with something a little bit like a cattle prod. And there's a lot there in terms of like, okay, how it doesn't pass certification. What are you going to do? And so on. So having the right partner to really take ownership over that aspect of the business unlocked everything for me. Because I am not really, first of all, I'm not an engineer of any type. And I'm also not a deep hardware guy. I guess you could say I'm a little bit more of a product guy. I have, again, clear ideas of what I would like. I have many opinions. That doesn't mean I have the technical know-how to make those things happen, or that when I make an ask, I don't always know. I'm asking for something super complicated and impossible, or, oh no, we can do that. Or here's another creative solution where we can get what you want, but a little bit different. All of that stuff you're not going to get with an OEM. So that's really the big multiplier here. It's partnership with the right person.
Yeah, that seems like very, very fortunate, especially because it does seem like there's a lot of like time and expense on just like managing OEM relationships, or just like getting someone that you can trust, I guess, to really manufacture things. I had worked at a hardware company in my last job, Oxide Computer Company, and they had a manufacturing partner. And even though they had engineers embedded at the manufacturing partner, there was like always still problems that go on. And then usually the manufacturer, you're like not their only customer. So they're like, there are other timetables and schedules to take into account. So it's interesting that you're able to just like directly partner with them.
It's incredible. And it's also they're exactly the right scale, because often when you go to Shenzhen, these are very, very large operations, and we are not large. We're kind of boutique, and we needed that scale. So yeah, it's important.